One of the biggest rock albums of the 80s is celebrating 40 years with a special anniversary box set. Now, Joe Elliott celebrates Def Leppard's Pyromania on Planet Rock.
Welcome to you, Joe. So the Pyromania Deluxe Edition box set has just come out. So how are you feeling about that, and how does it feel to be celebrating this more than 40 years later?
It's a little surreal, really, because, you know, when you make an album, especially in 1982, you're still living in the now, where Zeppelin have only just split. Any bands that are still going, like The Who or the Stones, were maybe 20 years into their career. You don't think that there's such a thing as the 40-year career or 47-year career. With the Stones, it's nearly 60, and The Who are way past 50 now, you know. So when we sat down with Mutt at the very beginning in pre-production for the album that was to become Pyromania, we hadn't seen him since we finished High and Dry. You know, we finished the album, we say goodbye, and we go on tour, and he goes off and works with other bands. So then when you get together over coffee and biscuits, and you start saying, hey, how have you been? So what's going on? And you eventually just get around to the now, and you go, okay, so what's the plan? Are we going to make High and Dry 2? Or are we going to try and make an album that nobody's ever made? And that really piqued our interest. And then we would be the ones saying it from there on in, or we'd both be saying it together and giggling, you know. And Mutt came up with this theory of, like, we really could make an album that is massive breakout album for us, and it will sound vastly different to everything else that had been made up to that point, and was being made that year for future release in 83. And that's what really intrigued us. And it was taking on board a lot of stuff that people would never expect us to indulge, if you like machinery, drum machines, just the sonics and the ideas behind bands like New Order, Joy Division, Human League, stuff that wasn't what, you know, your regular rock fan would call rock music. But we were big fans of Queen. You know, we were big fans of the first Boston album. We were big fans of, but at the same time, the Sex Pistols. You know, we wanted that in AC/DC. We wanted that big guitar, big drum sound, but we wanted the big choruses like what Queen did, and kind of put them all in the bucket and give it a good stir and tip it out. I think with High and Dry, we'd all be the first to cop on to say it sounds more like Highway to Hell than Pyromania. But I think on Pyromania, we finally sounded like the Def Leppard that we wanted to be. So to be celebrating it now, 40 years on, is exactly what we wanted. So it worked.
As you said, it was quite a boot camp-like experience, wasn't it? It sounds like it was quite an intense experience making this album, because you were trying something so new, working with Mutt. When you look back at it and you now see the end result, when you were in the middle of it, was there ever a time where you think, this isn't going to happen, we're not going to be able to do it?
Pyromania was a much more level, even relationship, working kind of environment with Mutt, because we already knew him by then. So yeah, there was hard work, there was sticks thrown and tantrums thrown by the singer and storming out and all this kind of stuff. I don't know what you want from me, etc. But for the most part, we just had a really good laugh, because Mutt's he's a very encouraging person. All he's ever trying to do with anyone is to just bring the best out of them. And we just do work better under orders. We do, as people, you know. If somebody says you can do better than that, you kind of want to prove them right, you know, not prove them wrong by being inferior, you know. It's easy to say with hindsight, because I'm sure every band, when they deliver a record, go, oh, it's the greatest record ever made. And then it turns out 2 years later, it actually wasn't, you know. And far from Pyromania being the greatest record ever made, it certainly was the greatest record that we'd ever made to that point. And it was exactly the album that we said we were going to try and make 6, 7, 8 months earlier.
So with the look that you had for Pyromania, you say it became a bit of an accident. It was an accident, wasn't it? And then it became a thing with the Union Jack shirts. Did you ever wish you'd worn something else, or is it something that makes you smile when you look back?
Not at all. I think it's just a fascinating story, because it only becomes a story because it's lasted. MTV, which had just started in the States in August of 81, had now started to really get established, and it became obvious that videos were going to be a major part of the promotion for this record in the States. we booked Battery Power Station, as in the front cover of Animals by Pink Floyd. And we shot the video for Photograph on Sav's birthday, December the 2nd. And we shot the Rock of Ages video on Phil's birthday 6 days later. But before we did the Photograph video, we were given a budget of like £25 each to go and buy something to wear, you know, if we didn't already have something. And I literally went down the King's Road, and I remember finding the kind of handcuff belt, and that was like, you know, $9.99 or something. I had the Converse. Then there was these plastic lookalike leather, you know, plastic but leather looking trousers. They fit me around the waist, but they're way too short. So I had to buy the leg warmers, which were very in at the time because of things like Fame, just to cover the gap, you know. And I was literally left with like £8. And lo and behold, in what I think used to be McLaren's sex shop, there was a Union Jack shirt in the window for $7.99. And I thought, okay, that'll work. Because it was loud. They said, get something colourful, you know. So it just became a thing, you know. I didn't expect it to. It's just that the video got played so much in the States. And we just noticed kids turning up wearing Union Jack shirts all over America, which was just the ironic thing about it, you know. And it was Peter Mensch, our manager, said, we should sell those things, you know. So we started printing up some Jack shirts to sell on the T-shirt stand, and they were flying out the door every night. I mean, it was just crazy. By the time we, you know, got around to playing we'd go back to some of these cities a second time, kids were coming back again, and this place was full of Union Jack shirts. It was crazy.
I'm Jen Thomas in conversation with Joe Elliott, talking about the arrival of Pyromania's new deluxe edition box set, and of course more than 40 years of the album being in our ears. But with such a long career and a big back catalogue, which song are you most proud of?
That's a loaded question. I hate those questions. You know, I do this like saying, which is your favourite child? You know, I suppose Photograph, really, because the way it came about, you know, it went through a massive kind of genesis. It went from this leftover from the previous album to this song that still gets played on the radio now as much as it did in 1983 when it became a hit in the specifically in North America. The journey that I can still remember us taking at the time, that it gave us this road ahead to keep making that journey, if you like. You know, I used to live in Isleworth in the basement flat next door to Bernie Tormé with Frank Noon, who played on the Def Leppard EP, living above. It was frat house. It was total Animal House, you know. And the previous tenant in my flat had punched a hole through the toilet wall, so it looked like that scene in Shawshank Redemption. And I just put a poster of Marilyn Monroe over the hole, you know. And so every time you go into the bathroom, you see this poster of Marilyn Monroe, and it just sticks in your mind. It starts to sink into your DNA. And when we started putting the lyrics together, and I think Mutt was just humming da da da, and then eventually it became Photograph. And I just thought of this photograph of Marilyn. I said, how about we write a lyric about the ultimate can't have, because no longer with us, sort of thing, you know. Which kind of reminded me of Pictures of Lily by the Who, when Townsend's character finds out that, Lily died in 1929 or whatever it was, you know. It was kind of along those lines, and that just intrigued Mutt, and he went, yeah, okay, cool. And I'm really proud that we pulled it off, because it was a nasty song to sing. And I'll be honest, the 64-year-old me would love to go back in the TARDIS and punch the 22-year-old me in the face and say, no, because you're going to have to sing this in 42 years' time, which we weren't thinking about at the time, you know. And it gets harder each year to hit those notes. Ask Roger Daltrey.
So what is still on the wish list to do? What have you got planned coming up for Def Leppard?
We have at least a 10-year plan. You know, God willing, health allows, and just general life allows to happen, you know. It's a wish list. It's not necessarily a plan, but we're not thinking of knocking on the head anytime soon. So we've got lots of things on the go. We're writing new music. We obviously want to make another album. Initially, the first thing we've got going is this 26-show American tour with Journey and Steve Miller, or Heart or Cheap Trick, depending which city it is. And, you know, we've also got a bit of film documentary stuff in the makings. So there's a lot of fingers in a lot of pies. Probably the quickest way of answering that question. I look at, especially recently, these interviews with Townsend and Daltrey. You know, Rogers finally stepping back a little bit from Teenage Cancer Trust, and Townsend saying that, you know, he thinks there's one more tour in the Who, and I'm thinking these guys are 20 years older than we are. You know, and there's still an enthusiasm, and that bubbles back towards people like us, specifically me, to like, you know, Ian Hunter, 84 years old, just put 2 albums out in just over a year. This to me is totally inspiring, and I'd like to think that health allowing, we kind of carry on doing the same thing, really.